Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Evan Here's Culture Campaign. Today I have an esteemed guest, a comedian, a musician himself, a poet, the first guest that ever appeared on this show, and the first guest to ever appear again, which means we must like him a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Billy Brodeur, and today we're going to be talking about Gil Scott-Heron's 2010 album, I'm New Here.
A great album.
So, Billy, you had not listened to this album before, but you reached out to me when you saw there was a Gil Scott-Heron album on the list and wanted to be involved in it. What's your experience with Gil Scott-Heron? Why do you?
I was very surprised to see that there was a 2010 album from Gil Scott-Heron because I'm sure many people like me have found Gil Scott-Heron from the very famous The Revolution Will Not Be Televised and other sort of like big 80s funk classics that he came out with. But I remember finding not maybe 2 years ago the Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson album Bridges, which totally put him from like one level to the next for me, because I love that album and I think it's one of my favorites of all time. And that's what exposed me to how much of like a true poet I really thought, and like true poet extraordinaire I thought Gil Scott-Heron is, and was in that time. And then I had no idea that it had, come back in the 2010s, that I had completely missed it back then.
16-year gap from the last album he released. It was 1994 was the album before this one. And he was in and out of prison a few times during this period, which is really interesting for drug possession and,
just and so much of that mentality of living on the outskirts of society and on like the edge of sort of accepted behavior is so prevalent on that album too. I was really excited to learn more about where he had been for that time as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting that he'd been away, because I had sort of figured going into it that I'm New Here, the title was in reference to that of like the whole music scene has changed and kind of the world has changed a lot while I've been gone, and so I'm now the stranger in the world. But it seems like it was more of actually a spiritual renewal was kind of what it was referring to, although that seems to be an element of it.
Yeah, and I know I was listening on Apple Music, and Apple Music always has those excellent little making of documentaries after classic albums and albums by, certain artists of believe this ilk, honestly, in general. And I loved getting to sort of see his workings of his mind, the workings of the studio, and how the music writer Patrick Taylor, like what he was bringing, because I know there was this great quote in there about Gil Scott-Heron coming to him and been like, "I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for someone to finally come and be like, let's do this. Let's make something new." And I thought that was so, I don't know, just emblematic of the whole album. To think like this feels so cathartic for him to finally get to make this.
Yes. And so speaking of the album as a whole, it's, it's 28 minutes, it's 15 tracks, but that is a little misleading to say 15 tracks because it starts with kind of a prologue of sorts, and it ends with an epilogue that are the same.
The two parts of one poem.
Yeah, part one and part two, and then there are a few interludes in between that are just these quick, like 30-second snippets of a little sort of sonic soundscape and a kind of clever aphorism or two.
All of the interludes are honestly under 20 seconds. I'm seeing right here. That's what's so wild about them to me, is that it's like each one is just this one soundbite of something he's said, which just so kind of poignantly describes the next theme of the album for you, or the previous theme, or kind of some.
Yeah, it'll take you out of one track and like transition you smoothly into the next track, not jarring at all to throw this.
I had almost forgotten how good interludes can be on albums. I feel like I haven't heard a great modern album in so long with like excellent interludes to this caliber.
Yeah, and it'll be called interlude on the album, but it's really like a 2-minute instrumental track, and it's like, I don't know if this is really an interlude, but it's very much an interlude. My favorite of the interludes was there's one that's called like Parents, where you remember that one where he's like, your parents are telling you shit because they want you to live because they live on through you.
That was a good one.
And that's why they want you to listen to the shit.
Listen and you'll hear them.
Yeah.
Listen and you'll hear them was the end of that one. I remember that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
I liked that one, and the other one I was very, very into was I Was Guided. That one was great. That was a quick like 14-second. I was guided to get here. Great line.
What were some of the tracks that stuck out to you? I mean, I know these weren't. I love the on coming from a broken home, the first part, and then
Love that.
part two as well. Just you got it's over a Kanye sample,
Yep.
and he's just talking about kind of his childhood and important women in his life who raised him, and
Yeah,
that's
it's
great.
big on the themes of like Black motherhood and just like I don't know, like the sort of responsibility and like power that Black women have taken on in the sort of history, especially in the history of his lifetime.
And he picks it apart a little bit too, where he's like, it's not just the stereotype of
No,
that.
yeah,
He's like, I
absolutely.
know there's a stereotype of what that is, but this
But
goes
this
beyond
is
that. And the way he closes out the album of like, they call what we have a broken home, but and that's true on the surface, but not really broken if there's love there
hmm
and you're being given
yeah.
the love you need. But what are some of the tracks? Or well,
I loved those two tracks, and I wasn't surprised to learn that those were the first tracks for the album in the direction that the album ended up taking. Before that, it was a little more of just a dry cut, sort of singer-songwriter, piano, spoken word album. And that was the first time where the music writer producer had like come to him and been like, "What about something? This is just an example that I've put together to like hear the vibe that we want to go for." And Gil Scott-Heron rather was like, "Oh, this is what we're doing. This is what we need to be doing more of with that Kanye sample." I think that's from Flashing Lights, which is a song that I've never even
yeah.
particularly cared for by Kanye. Very interesting pick. And I it works so well and so perfectly. It's made me like the original even more, the connection between the two. But a song that I really got into was Running and The
Yeah.
Crutch. I think that quick 2-track part right at the end before what really is the last two, the interlude into the final on Coming from a Broken Home part 2. Oh, those two songs feel like such a great finale before the sort of tension break that is the last song, the epilogue, if you will. I
Mhm.
really loved those two songs together. I, coming from being such a big fan of Bridges, I was going into the album with like I think a subconscious sort of desire for a track like a Tuskegee 626, which is like an interlude from that album that works really well, and some of the percussion on this, phenomenal. And that I think what I was really interested in was to see him dabble, and that song deals with some horrifically dark, very very significant sort of themes. And I didn't get like that one track like that, but I think that that's a very sort of succinct description of the whole album. It deals with all of the very like most personal, vulnerable, and like macabre sort of inner workings of this life that I really really enjoy, and what I had desired for that in the first place. New York is Killing Me, the longest
That's
track on
great.
the album,
Yes.
one of the best for sure.
I do. So I do the like master playlist of the whole culture campaign where I'll put a few select tracks
Yeah.
on that. And so what I put was I'm new here and then New York is killing me. But the interesting thing is I actually don't think I would recommend listening to any one track on this album just like
Mm,
in isolation. I think you got to go whole hog. It's not that long. You just got to listen to the whole thing as because it really all functions together.
I completely
Thing
agree.
is great, but it doesn't quite have the same impact unless you're going down the rabbit hole with them.
I think if you knew someone who was into this very spoken word, like late Johnny Cash, classic like Leonard Cohen sort of style, I think you could play Me and the Devil or I'm New Here, some of those more tracks like that. But I think you're completely correct.
Yes, there was an interesting. I looked at there was some of the reception to this album. There was one person who was like, "It's great, but what prohibits it from being a masterpiece is how short it is." I'm like, "That's ridiculous."
Yeah,
That's
that's
what
crazy
that's what
talk.
keeps it good is that it doesn't overstay its welcome. And
It could have been longer, I think,
yeah,
and still not
yeah,
have overstayed any
of
welcome.
course,
But I don't think that it's a detriment to the album.
no,
I think if anything, it's pretty smart. We're on this short album wave now, 10 years later.
right.
Love putting out albums and tapes rather that are like this short.
And we'll
It's,
get
it's
to. I'll definitely be getting into some of that as the
yeah,
culture and
absolutely.
one specific album I'm thinking of. But yeah. Now, I guess sort of to kind of wrap it up, like obviously this came out in 2010, and then the next year after that, Gil Scott-Heron passed away.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this album as being like the swan song? This is the final album, like in that context, because I mean, it starts with his childhood, which
Yeah.
is really interesting, and then kind of moves to his later life. So it's like
A
it's
magnum
a time
opus of
capsule
sorts.
of everything, yeah, that he did. But
Definitely. That's a great way of putting it because it does look over all elements and like all time periods in his life. And I think, I don't know, I see it as a gorgeous finale that is so like heartwarming and uplifting due to that fact that he got so close to the end of his life without having a chance to make that. And not even like right at the last moment, not in any sort of like tragic way did he push this album out and it wasn't quite as much as it could have been. It was made all the way through. It was like perfectly made in my opinion, perfectly structured. It came out and he had time to appreciate that he had done this. And I feel like it's honestly a very peaceful story when you think of it in that sense.
yeah,
When you think of how long he went without having the opportunity. There are a lot of people across many different mediums where like they will sort of get seen as like old news and they will have more in the tank but like not the ability and the resources, and so that could have easily been a story with someone as brilliant as Gil Scott-Heron. That would have been a tragedy is my big thought on that.
it was wise of him to create one of those kinds of albums that really gets reflective.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely, and it's beautiful all the way
no,
through.
yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
and that's why I think your point is so important, that like it's an album to listen to fully at least the first time. And if then you don't necessarily want to dive into it every time, you have your songs that you really like, that's good. But to truly appreciate the album, you have to listen through it at least that first time, I think.
Yeah.
And that's not, to be snotty and say that someone can like just one song, but oh, it's a beautiful piece just as a total package.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great encapsulation of what it's all about. So check out Gil Scott-Heron's I'm New Here. Now, Billy, do you have anything coming down the pipeline that you want to promote? I say
Oh.
that for posterity's sake. I know it's hard to promote anything right now.
As you know, a movie that you are heavily involved in, me and many of our friends have Back at 12 coming out.
Yeah.
Stove Mouse Winery Productions has a great movie coming down the pipeline, hopefully for you and yours to all enjoy. It's family friendly for the most part. Um,
No, that's
some
not
some
that. That was
some mild warnings on language, but it's definitely one for the
no,
kids.
there's a ton of
Don't need a
drug use.
sitter. Oh no, it's a college film. People understand what it is, and so
Yeah,
no,
it's
we will.
the antithesis of a family-friendly film. Is there a
Quick
chance that
series
this might
campaign.
be straight to VOD? This
If it is, it'll be one of the best of all time. Because here's the thing about Back at 12, the film that you can all look up. Back at 12 is the movie's name. BACKAT 12.
yes,
Uh,
no ads.
is no hat sign.
Yeah,
Is going to be the greatest cult classic film of all time. But also, we personally, I'm hoping to be putting a quick video out soon, just a comedy video that I've been working on. So people will look up Billy Brodeur on YouTube, they would find it. Hopefully within the coming month or so.
that's great to hear. Well, I'll certainly promote it. As I'll promote anything you do as you're a
Oh,
friend
thank
of
you,
the
brother.
show, friend of the culture campaign.
Last thing that I should say, and I would be remiss not to, is to check out Max Carr and the other great poets such as Evan, writer here on Uncle Tiger Publishing House Family, the poetry platform that I produce, and
See
brought in
poetry.
with a great friend. Yeah, HC Poetry.
See poetry. All right,
Thanks so much, guys. Thank
no
you so
problem.
much for having me, Evan. It means the world.